The kidney, a paired organ that sits in the back of your abdomen. It serves vitally important roles, including filtering urine from your blood, removing drugs, regulating your blood pressure, and helping produce vitamin D, and helping control red blood cell production. And until relatively recently, almost nothing was known about it. The image on the left is a sketch of the internal organs by Da Vinci, including two rudimentarily drawn kidneys toward the bottom. The image on the right, taken from a contemporary research paper, is an example of how advanced our understanding of kidney disease is today. Over the course of this lecture series, I'm going to show you how we got from where we were to how we got to where we are. I hope to achieve this goal in part by invoking the words of writer and conservationist Rachel Carlson, who said that, quote, "Once the emotions have been aroused, a sense of the beautiful, the excitement of the new and the unknown, a feeling of sympathy, pity, admiration, or love, then we wish for knowledge about the subject of our emotional response." This shouldn't be too hard to do, since the story that I tell you is full of wondrous and colorful imagery, and populated by extraordinarily colorful figures. My name is Matthew Tortora, and I practice diagnostic pathology in northern New Jersey, serving Cooperman-Barnabas Medical Center and Clara Moss Medical Center. This is the first of a multi-part lecture series on the history of renal medicine, which I've given before to the departments of pathology, medicine, and humanities at Cooperman-Barnabas Medical Center. This is part one of the first lecture entitled Eponyms, Experiments, Glands, and Corpuscles, an examination of Marcello Malpighi and other historical digressions. I hope it conjures your emotions so that you wish for more knowledge about this most fascinating subject. Let's get started. Do not stop to question whether these ideas are new or old, but ask more properly whether they harmonize with nature. And be assured of this one thing, that I never reached my idea of the structure of the kidney by the aid of books, but rather by the long, patient, and varied use of the microscope. I have gotten the rest by deduction of reason, slowly, and with an open mind, as is my custom. Marcello Malpighi. Dogma. A principle or set of principles laid down by an authority as incontrovertibly true. Up until the 17th century, Marcello Malpighi's time, the idea of overturning millennia of medical dogma by using, of all things, direct observation was nothing short of heresy. But before we get to Malpighi's observations, some provenance is in order. This will take a little time and will include stories of cities on fire, majestic soaring medieval towers, ancient kings, sieges, sports cars, the works of great masters, the occasional vivisected dog, tales of betrayal, ancient manuscripts, and far-off cities in far-off lands. We'll start in the Emilia-Romagna, a place famous for many things, including exotic sports cars and an eponymously named sliced deli meat. The ancient city for which it's named will play an important part in our story. The storied Emilia-Romagna, located in northern Italy, situated in a fertile valley, nestled in the safety of the Alps with endless rivers coursing through it. It's no surprise that it became a place of great prosperity and innovation. In particular, its city that the Etruscans called Valsina, and the Celts would call Bona, surrounded by two sets of walls. The Romans would call it Bononia, and they would infuse it with all the trappings befitting to a Romanized city, including a forum, amphitheater, and bathhouses. Here's the venerable city of Rome, as it might have looked as late as the 5th century AD. Even at that time, visitors would describe it as being awash in splendor. The empire was, by the 4th century, divided into two, the capital of the eastern half being Constantinople. By the 6th century, it was ruled by the Emperor Justinian. Now, Justinian was responsible for some incredible achievements. He built the Hagia Sophia, which still stands in Istanbul today. He also gave us something called Justinian's Code, which combined or condensed 400 years of Roman law. It comprised 4 works, in particular the Digest. It covered everything from marriage, slavery, property, inheritance, women's rights, and criminal justice. He also did some unfortunate things. In the mid-6th century, in an attempt to reconquer them for the ancient Eastern Empire, he besieged the cities of the Italic Peninsula, the oldest, most venerable part of the Western Roman Empire, and in the process, he thoroughly ruined each and every one of them. As each city fell, the heartland of Rome began to disappear and crumble. And so, for instance, the city of Rome, which had stood for 1,000 years, quickly went from looking like this to this. And the city of Bologna went from looking like this to probably something like this, as imagined in this romanticized capriccio from the 17th century. We'll revisit Bologna, or rather Bologna, in a bit. Without a civic infrastructure, without aqueducts, roads, grain shipments, society became less complex in the West. Literacy began to disappear, and when there was no one left to describe the ancient writings also disappeared. In some instances, the works that did survive were down to only single copies. By 600, parts of Italy were under the lordship of the Eastern Roman Empire known as the Exarchate of Ravenna. In the Exarchate, in the Amalfi Coast, perhaps in some decaying ancient building that looked like this, sat the last remaining copy of Justinian's Digest. We'll come back to this in a bit. Now, some ancient works were preserved by way of the Middle East. It was in the 9th century that an Arab scholar of Christian descent named Hunayn ibn Ishaq rediscovered and began to translate the works of this man. And from the Arab translations came Latin translations, came Byzantine translations, and thus, by the early modern period, Galen was reintroduced to the West. Galen. He was a 2nd century anatomist, doctor, surgeon, philosopher from Pergamon, Turkey. He was the most accomplished medical researcher in antiquity. He spoke of the 4 humors, black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm. He was a very prolific writer and was widely famous in his own time. This ancient Roman scholar studied anatomy to the extent that he was able to. He helped discover that there were structural differences between arteries and veins. He demonstrated the existence of the heart valves, and he showed that urine passed from the kidneys to the bladder. He also studied plants for medicinal purposes. But his work was also quite limited. For instance, his dissections were only performed on animals and never humans. He thought that blood passed from the left heart to right heart through pores in the septum. He thought that blood formed in the liver, then traveled through the veins. He thought that arteries contained blood and something called pneuma, a vital spirit. He felt that the brain also transmitted this vital spirit through hollow nerves. He also spoke frequently of animal spirits. A few other wrong assumptions and errors included that muscles attached to the bone in the same way in humans and dogs. The human jaw was made up of 2 bones, like a dog's. He made mistakes about the blood vessels in the brain, and he was mistaken about the shape of the human liver. Despite these errors, he remained the ultimate medical authority in the West for over 1,000 years. In fact, Galenic dogma was the cornerstone of Western medicine well into the 17th century. To give one a sense of how permeative Galenic dogma was, I'll read to you about the reti mirabile. The reti mirabile, located in the human head, was first described by Galen. Galen's dissection of a sheep head rather than a human head led to centuries of anatomists dutifully propagating the myth that a human reti mirabile existed. Galen believed that the human ready transformed vital spirits into animal spirits. And because this world-changing physician was so revered and his work taken so staunchly as fact, the next 1400 years saw advances in neurology come to a near standstill, as the brain itself was ignored in favor of this imaginary system. It wasn't until Vesalius in the 16th century began to dissect actual cadavers that this notion was overturned. Even still, other academics preferred to believe that their eyes were fallible rather than that the great Galen could possibly be wrong. With that in mind, we return to a previous discussion. Here, in medieval Pisa, a very important discovery was about to take place. Justinian's Digest. It had made its way from the Amalfi Coast and resurfaced in Pisa in the 12th century. Other legal writings were also rediscovered at this time. But why is this ancient text of Roman law so important to our story? The answer is because a medieval scholar in Bologna named Irnerius would translate the Digest and other similar writings into the inherited tradition of medieval law in Europe. And more importantly, he would found a school around it in Bologna. A school that would grow and grow and grow as students from all over flocked to Bologna to learn to study law, then disseminate not just what they learned, but the methods in which they learned it to the rest of medieval Europe. So many students from all around Europe were pouring into Bologna that they began to form mutual aid societies called nations for bargaining rights. This helped them protect themselves against what were considered harsh punishments to foreign students within Bologna. These nations would even hire their own teachers. In time, they would band together for even greater collective bargaining into a larger association called Universitas. Thus, these Hungarians, Englishmen, Tuscans, Gasconians, Lombards, and others were part of the founding of the first university, the University of Bologna, in 1088. And in short time, the construct of the university would spread all throughout medieval Europe. Now, right about now, you may be wondering when we're going to hear from our titular figure. The answer is in the next lecture. Look for it soon. If you enjoyed this presentation, want to see more of the lecture series, or have questions about the history of medicine or of pathology, please feel free to contact me. And thank you very much for listening.